Okay, it's been a hot minute since I've done a book talk, and I'm going to do something a little different. I'm thinking that what I might start doing, kind of like I was doing like I do a vinyl wrap up for all the vinyl albums that I got, I'm going to do a book wrap up for all the books that I've read. Now, these books are books that I've finished, but today's January 20th, so I'm going to say these were December and January. I think I read all of these or finished all of these pretty close to December or January. Going forward, I'll be more concise. I'll be more right on the nose here. But I'm going to call this December 24, January 25 reading roundup. So let's see. What was the order that I read these in? Let's go. Yeah, it's kind of like this. All right, here we go. Starting out. The first book that I want to talk about is The Exvangelicals. Now, this book, the subtitle of this is Loving, Living, and Leaving the White Evangelical Church, and this is by Sarah McCammon. Sarah McCammon is an NPR journalist. She is, as well, someone who grew up in the Christian community. She served as a political aide in Washington, D.C., and she kind of talks about her experiences, both with politics and faith, and unfortunately with the merging of those two through Christian nationalism. And she talks about, the ways that the evangelical church has failed people. One of the things, so for me, as I read through this book, I saw myself so clearly. I think it helped me to understand things about myself, and this is a book I may go back and read again. But she kind of went chapter by chapter, right? It's like each chapter kind of built on something from the previous chapter that I had experienced. So I'm just going to tell you some of the names of some of the later chapters especially. Chapter 9, Whom Does Jesus Love? Chapter 10, A Virtuous Woman. Chapter 11, Naked and Ashamed. Chapter 12, Be Fruitful and Multiply. Chapter 13, Suffer the Little Children. So many of the chapters in here, as I went along, they dealt with ways that I had been kind of raised, not by my parents, but by the church that I was attending, to sort of believe that this is how the world works. And as I've gotten older, I've deconstructed those beliefs some, and I've seen that in many ways, those belief systems were not based in the Bible necessarily. They were based in a tradition that really doesn't have a leg to stand on in a lot of ways. Now, I'm still a Christian, still of Jesus, but I found many of those belief systems to be problematic, and I no longer follow them. And so this book was, if you're someone that grew up in the evangelical church and has found yourself wrestling with those beliefs, wrestling with what your faith currently looks like, or in some cases, whether you still have faith, I highly recommend this book so that, if nothing else, you'll know that you're not alone. You're not the only person that's going through that. It's a phenomenal book. I give it 5 stars. One of my favorite books of last year. Highly recommend it. As we got into the season of Advent, my family and I read this book, Bright Evening Star by Madeline. And this is a book that was recommended through another book we were using for Advent, the Gold and Gladden Hours, something like that. I'm so sorry that I don't remember the name of it. But this was a really great book. And again, growing up evangelical, it was really rewarding to me to read about someone else's experience wrestling with their faith. This particular person was Episcopalian. Madeline, the author of the series of books, the Wrinkle in Time series, she just has such a way of writing that it got to the heart of it. My family and I read this together, a chapter at a time, and I found it to be really rich and rewarding. It's dealing with basically her own. It's Madeline contemplates the mystery and the majesty of the Incarnation when God became flesh and Jesus Christ was born onto earth as a human being. In a deeply personal narrative, she invites us to a spiritual adventure that leads to the heart of Christmas. So I highly recommend this book, especially leading into Advent season. It's a really great one to pick up. I think I'd probably give that book about 4 stars. Very, very short novella that I read right before Christmas, Small Things Like These. And I talked about this a little bit in my wrap-up video, my favorites of 2024. It's another book that made it on the list. I highly recommend this. It's very short, just over 100 pages. And in some ways, this book reminds me of like A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, where it's kind of just people living their lives, but it's a simple wrestling. This man who is wrestling like everyone else is to survive, to pay the bills, to have a happy life, running a business that provides coal, and stumbles upon something that just doesn't sit right, and wrestles with, do I let it go? Is it my business? The people who are kind of doing this thing, which in this case was the Catholic Church in Ireland, have a lot of power in this town. Do I confront that? Or do I do something about it? Do I rock the boat? I guess is essentially the question. Very powerful short story about the responsibility that we all have to one another. Really highly recommend that. Really need to see the movie adaptation of it too. Next book, Bible Translations for Everyone by Tim Wildsmith. Another one of the books that ended up on my top 10. Really, really loved this book. It's a short, easy read. Goes translation by translation through a little bit of the history, and then provides you some scriptures in that translation for you to look at and say whether you like or don't like. It does the KJV, the Revised Version, and American Standard Version, the Revised Standard Version, the New American Standard Bible, the New International Version, the New King James Version, the New Revised Standard Version, the New Living Translation, the English Standard, the Christian Standard, a few more translations there at the end, some Catholic Bible translations, and kind of wraps it up. Really good if you're trying to figure out what translation is right for you, or what translations you want to kind of augment that with or support that with. I highly recommend this, and I can't wait for Tim Wildsmith's next book. So I would give this, I'd probably give this 4.5 out of 5 stars. But this is maybe not one I would go back to read all the time, but one that I'm glad I have in my collection if I ever want to go back. So the last book, something very different than the other books that I read. This was my faculty book club book. And I don't remember exactly how I stumbled upon this. I think I was reading the description of it and I thought, oh, this sounds great. I'm looking forward to it. But this is Anita deMonte Laughs Last by, I'm not going to pronounce her name right, Xochitl Gonzalez. I probably mispronounced the first name wrong. So 2 stories going on in this. One, I believe, is set in like the 70s. The other set in the 90s. We have Anita deMonte, who is a Cuban refugee living in America, who is an artist, and she's very passionate. And she meets and marries this other artist named Jack Martin, who is, to be quite frank, kind of abusive, very narcissistic, and very powerful. And they have a very toxic relationship. And the second story follows another woman who is, let me get her name real quick, Raquel. Raquel is a Puerto Rican American going to Brown University for art history. She's in her master's program. She's, is she in her master's or undergrad? Anyway, she's in college. She's working on her thesis about Jack Martin, and she realizes that she discovers Anita, and Anita has been like out of the public light. Nobody remembers her for the most part. They've forgotten her. And as she learns Anita's story, she notices how it mirrors her own. There's like somewhat of a like fantasy element at the end of the story that is really interesting and powerful. The book deals a lot with the power that women have, and the power that they give up, and the power that men try to take. And it is a really powerful, sometimes funny, often shocking story. Very enjoyable. I think I'd probably give this maybe another 4.5 stars. So, quick video, just 10 minutes, going over 5 books, but I wanted to take a minute and talk about all those. All of them really good books, worth talking about, and I highly recommend each of them. And I will see you at the end of February with a February reading roundup.